I've loved RPGs ever since I was a kid. The feeling of steadily building up your party members, battling terrifying foes, and exploring fantastic new worlds far removed from our own is one that hasn't gotten old even after so many years. It's safe for me to say that if I hadn't fallen in love with RPGs, I probably wouldn't have fallen in love with video games as a whole. For as much as I owe the genre to my gaming career, if you can call it that, so far though, there was always one subcategory that I'd always had trouble getting into: the open world RPG. Open worlds are used in a multitude of game genres and have become a mainstay in the industry. Open world RPGs have always been successful in the West, with giant franchises like Elder Scrolls and Fallout first starting out in the 90s. It wasn't until the early 2000s that a lot of the ideas and concepts you can see in open world games today were first used. Seamlessly interconnected areas with little loading in between, huge amounts of skills and traits to improve through leveling up, all sorts of NPCs to interact with and learn more about the world through quests. These things were and still are staples to the genre. These can make the game feel more immersive with just how easy it is to get lost in them. It's that ease of getting lost where my own personal distaste for most open world games happens. See, I have a really bad attention span. If I don't have anything that immediately hooks me into a game or otherwise gets me attached to the characters when starting out, I usually end up getting overwhelmed like a kid lost in an amusement park. Except instead of being surrounded by rides and attractions, it's stark reminders of the cruelty of man and assorted hellspawn. Oh, but there is that roller coaster in Prim in New Vegas, so maybe there are rides there? I don't know. I really want to emphasize that by no means am I saying that open world games as a whole are poorly designed. You can take these issues that I had and spin them to be positives. It's a purely subjective opinion that I had, and I realize that. The reason I bring this all up is because in spite of all my personal hangups I had with the genre, there was one series that completely changed my opinion on open world games and gave me the perspective I needed to really appreciate them. That series was Xenoblade Chronicles. All three, or at least the three that are out as of this video, games in the series have absolutely incredible takes on the open world formula. I want to talk about all of them at some point, but they're all so different from one another with their own strengths and weaknesses. Also, I do not have a Wii U anymore, so I can't get any footage for Xenoblade Chronicles X, and that makes me sad. So for today's video, we're just going to talk about the original game. Even though it takes the simplest approach out of them all, it still has so much care and attention etched into so many aspects of its design. I want to share what I think are 4 aspects of the way Xenoblade's open world is handled that show this. These are the map design, the exploration, the combat, and the atmosphere. Alright, with all that said, I think we can dive right in. Let's hit it. I used to hate how confined the levels in open world games felt. That probably sounds ridiculously backwards given the premise of the genre, so let me try to explain. In most open world games, the environment the player starts out in will be the same environment that they end in. New Vegas stays in the Mojave Wasteland, Skyrim stays in Skyrim. To offset the lack of different locations, the focus is put on making these singular areas as dense with things to do and find as possible. You really only need to take a look at the Assassin's Creed or Watch Dogs games to see this idea in action. Xenoblade takes its level design in a different direction. Instead of having one massive map with everything packed inside of it, it uses a lot of not quite as big but still really big maps that not only spread the density of content to not be as overwhelming, but also cover a bunch of different environments. A sprawling grassland, a quiet marsh, a tropical forest, a snowy mountain. There are so many cool locales in Xenoblade, and this is only scratching the surface. There's still plenty to do within each area. Each one has its own points of interest to find and a checklist of collectibles to search for, just like in traditional open world games. Of course, there are a bunch of quests and NPCs to meet along the way as well. Where the biggest difference lies is in how you obtain the collectibles and their usage within the game, but we'll elaborate more on that in the next section. By opting for multiple smaller maps rather than one huge interconnected one, this makes the areas in Xenoblade much more memorable and distinct from one another. Nothing feels like it was put in as an afterthought or for the sake of padding. One of my favorite aspects of the design is the focus on verticality. For the better part of the game, your objective is to reach the top of one of the giant titans that make up the landmass the people of this world live on. Each area has you making your way up or down the various parts of the Titan, so there's a tangible sense of progress the higher you go. The maps aren't just a direct climb either, they're absolutely massive. There's a video by user Disguises on YouTube called Xenoblade Chronicles. It's not that big, it's even more. In this video, they run from the weapon development lab in Colony 9 all the way to the beach in Aerith Sea. The footage is sped up and they take the most direct route possible while avoiding any sort of encounters, and it still takes them 12 minutes into the video before they reach their destination. The video was released in 2011, just after the European localization, before we got it here in the US. It was one of my first times seeing the game, and realizing how huge the world was for a game on the Wii blew my mind back then. What I didn't know watching it then was how literal the title was. Xenoblade isn't as big as the video showed it, there is so much more. The number of areas you go through from Colony 9 to Aerith Sea only make up roughly half of the total amount in the game. That is bonkers to me. So yeah, the maps are all interesting conceptually and there's tons of space for you to explore. But what's the point in running around and exploring an open world without anything to find in it? Well, I am so glad I asked, because we're going to talk about that next. Exploration is a critical piece to any open world game. When you're not busy with story stuff or fighting baddies, you're probably going around to different places looking for the next new thing. Whether that's a point of interest, a building to scavenge, or an NPC to interact with, the important part is that the player is rewarded for taking the time to explore the world beyond what the story expects of them. So then, how does Xenoblade incentivize exploration while still making it enjoyable for the player? The first example that probably comes to mind for most people are the many landmarks you can find in each area. Whenever you come across a sub-area or a point of interest, the game updates your map with the name of that place and rewards the whole party with XP, AP, and SP. These are all the types of points you use to make the party stronger and enhance their abilities. This is the most basic way of rewarding a player in any RPG, not just ones with an open world. There's a certain joy only felt by seeing big damage numbers, so getting the resources you need to hit those numbers through exploring makes it a lot more satisfying. You also get a new fast travel option when finding a point of interest. Filling out your map both helps you make the party more powerful and makes it easier to travel to specific places. I brought up the collectibles earlier, so let's talk about them a bit more. Compared to how tedious most other games can be, the way Xenoblade handles gathering items in the field is pretty simple. There are tiny blue orbs littered all over the place, and when you move your character over one of them, you instantly get a collectible item unique to that area. No need to find a specific object to interact with or to have a certain skill at a high enough proficiency. You're able to get any item from any area from these same blue orbs. By filling out the Collectopedia, you're rewarded with some really good equipment too. I don't think that this whole thing is handled perfectly though. It's a dice roll every time you pick up an orb on what item you'll get, so if you're looking for one last piece to complete a page of your Collectopedia and don't have some really good luck, it can get frustrating. I do think that there are some things to offset this a bit, so we'll talk about them in a sec. Then there are the secret locations. These are special points of interest that are found in what I would consider the prettiest areas of the game. They generally require you to go way off the beaten path to find, but it never feels like any of them are impossible to discover on your own. If you're thorough enough in exploring an area and pay attention to the land itself rather than your map, you shouldn't have any trouble finding them. And even if you don't find them your first time going through an area, odds are likely that there's a quest you can find that will need you to go there. It's especially true in the case of the Definitive Edition, but the game does a fantastic job of pushing the player towards discoveries in the open world through its quests. These range from helping townsfolk find something they've dropped to trying to find Nopon Santa Claus in a spot where you can see a rainbow going over a waterfall. As long as you've accepted a quest and are in the same area as its objective, an exclamation point will show up on your map showing you where to go. This includes collectibles from those really annoying blue orbs, marking only the orbs that have the items that you need. This means that the element of chance that we talked about earlier gets eliminated as long as you're working on a quest that requires those specific collectibles. It even goes a step further if you have a quest set as active. You'll see a small blue trail appear on your map that will take you directly to your objective if you follow it. Fun fact, I didn't know this was in the game until I started working on the videos, so if you're just starting out or in an earlier part, definitely do this. Save me a lot of time. Anyway, completing quests rewards the player with more than just XP and equipment. It also improves their reputation with the different regions of the game's world, which affects things like shop prices, how much you can sell your items for, what items NPCs will offer for trade, and the value of your items in that trade. Most importantly, raising your affinity and completing certain quests open even more quests, so it almost never feels like you've run out of things to do. So to sum it up, the game makes exploration rewarding through tangible growth and items the player can use to improve their party, but keeps it engaging by removing some of the tedium in item gathering and nudging them to new experiences through its quests. I really like these aspects, but they mean almost nothing if the main gameplay while you explore the open world isn't as enjoyable. Well, it's great that it is in Xenoblade then. In a game like Fallout, you'll probably run into a few irradiated creatures or some raiders when traveling in between story sections. The encounters here are really straightforward, amounting to all the complexity of shoot it till it's dead or till you're dead. Not only that, but combat situations very rarely occur like this out in the open. The most interesting fun fights are only in the story and quest beats of the game. And it's not just Fallout that does this type of thing, there are plenty of other games that are set up like this too. It's almost the opposite in Xenoblade though. Scripted story encounters are scarce compared to the number of enemies you'll run into just going from one point to the next. Along with that, the game's most fun and challenging battles are against its over 150 unique monsters. These are essentially boss enemies, and you're able to find the majority of them out in the world while you're exploring. Anytime I would be combing a new area for the first time and found another one to fight, my excitement would spike through the roof. The game encourages the player to go out and find these enemies by having quests that require you to track down and beat them. You can also obtain some of the best gear and important art manuals to improve your party and the chests that they drop. There's no real optimal method to approaching these fights. Without going overboard on the details, the combat feels fun and rewarding no matter what sort of party setup you want to go for. With enough creative thinking and the right gear, you can handle any challenge the game throws at you however you'd like. But this doesn't mean that there aren't any walls you can run into. To better explain this, let's talk about one of my favorite enemies in the entire game and the series, Territorial Rotbart. By the time you've reached the Bionis Leg, you've had your fair share of boss fights in the story, and you've probably beaten a few unique monsters back in Colony 9 and Tefra Cave. You figured out just how important the break and topple effects are, the positional effects from your archer getting easier to hit, and now you've even got a healer? Oh man, there's nothing that can stop you now. But, just as soon as that thought passes your mind, you see him in the distance. And right away, you realize that this is another unique monster just waiting to be taken down. All of the ones you've run into up till now have been tough, but nothing you can't beat without some coordination and awareness. You convince yourself that this won't be any different, and start to make your way towards him. But, when you get close enough that you're able to target him, you realize just how wrong you were. And he's like, "I'll be your contradiction." This is a very common occurrence in Xenoblade. You'll be minding your business, roaming the world, and before you know it, you've attracted the attention of an enemy that's 3 times your level. This can happen with regular enemies too, not just the unique monsters. There'll be sections of an area filled with really powerful monsters that you'll have absolutely no chance of beating your first time through. This sort of thing may be annoying to some people, but I think it's a brilliant design choice. First, it makes the world that you're exploring feel way less video gamey. The enemies in each area don't just get steadily stronger as you go along like your average JRPG, but instead, there are a variety of strong and weak ones to be found. The environments feel more like a living, breathing ecosystem rather than just another video game level to get through because of this. Not only that, but it also pushes the player to revisit areas that they've already been to. There are almost always challenges to overcome no matter where you're at in the game's world. By introducing these early on as seemingly insurmountable obstacles, you're motivated to get strong enough to take them down and see what lies beyond them. The feeling I got when I was able to finally go back to Gower Plain with an entire journey's worth of experience at my side and take down the territorial Rotbart for the first time was beyond cathartic, to say the least. And that's just scratching the surface on how enjoyable the challenge of Xenoblade can be. Like, look at this clip of Ryan soloing the super boss Final Marcus at level 1. Absolutely insane how much you can break the game with the proper setup. Okay, let's take a second to recap. Xenoblade's open world has a well-thought design theory behind it, rewards exploration while still keeping it engaging for the player, and has challenging enemies that serve as obstacles that are always satisfying to overcome. That sounds like a solid, complete idea for a good open world on its own, but there's one final aspect to Xenoblade's take on it that makes it genuinely special. It's also my favorite aspect: the atmosphere. Making a fictional world feel real is hard. Making a fictional world feel both real and interesting is even harder. You've made it this far in the video, so you can already guess that I think Xenoblade does this. How exactly does it do this with its open world then? By making it integral to showing what the game's world is and the story it tells. One of the most unique things about Xenoblade is its setting. It doesn't take place on a continent, an island, or any sort of normal piece of land. Instead, the characters of its world live on the bodies of two enormous titans that fought each other ages ago. The story starts out in Colony 9, located on the foot of one of these titans, the Bionis. After reaching the end of Tephra Cave, you find yourself on the kneecap of the titan. You get your first good look at the other titan, the Mechonis, while starting to really process just how gigantic these beings are, and that they are the world that you're exploring. This goes hand in hand with the focus on verticality I mentioned before. Every area is a different body part of the titan. As you make your way up the Bionis, there are points where you'll be able to see areas you've already visited, or ones that are further ahead. My favorite example of this is how you're able to see the Aerith Sea floating above Magna Forest. It's surprising when you first realize what it is, but it doesn't feel like it's out of place in this strange, beautiful world. Every area feels unique and brimming with life. I never get tired of revisiting places because they all have their own charm to them. The soft light glowing from the trees in Satorl Marsh at night, the vast open waters dotted with floating islands in Aerith Sea, the serene snowfall of Valak Mountain. There's so many places in this world that feel like they wouldn't belong in any other game. Well, besides the Bionis Leg, that's just your average open grassland level from most games. I seriously wish we got any other area as a stage in Smash. And, while I'm on the topic, why Metalface? I get he's the poster villain for the game, but come on, my man Rotbart would have been way scarier and representative of the Gower Plain experience. Anyway, let's get back on track. My personal favorite element to each area is, naturally, the music. There's a different version of the piece that plays for most areas depending on whether it's day or night while you're exploring them. Every tune you hear is meant to supplement the atmosphere of the piece they're played, and the music team knocked it out of the park. An area's topography is just as important as its music. The remastered tracks in the definitive edition sound even better, at least to me. Just listen to the night theme from Satorl Marsh for a sec, it is so good. There's one last thing I want to talk about, and it's a culmination of everything we've discussed up till now. However, this will be getting into major spoilers from the late game. If you haven't beaten the game yet and are going to, now's the time to click off the video and go do that. I'll be spoiling one of the most powerful moments in the story with what I'm about to talk about, and I think it's really important to experience this without any prior knowledge on what happens. Alright, one last chance. Okay, let's continue. After the battle with Egil at Galahad Fortress ends, the party falls into the ocean below. They eventually regroup in a village located by the fallen arm of the Mechonis. The village is inhabited by a race known as the Machina, who are native to the Mechonis. The main characters haven't even considered the possibility of people living on the Machine Titan up to this point of the story. When they're taken in and shown kindness by the Machina, they realize that the enemy that they thought were soulless machines are living beings with hopes, fears, and dreams just the same as them. Soon after arriving, the village's leader asks you to kill the one responsible for the attacks on the Bionis, his son, Egil, the very same one that the party just got done fighting. Now, the party needs to travel to the head of the Mechonis and reach the Mechana capital. This is an obvious parallel to climbing to the head of the Bionis, but the motivation behind this second expedition is starkly different. Shulk started out wanting to kill every Mechon, and viewing the Mechonis itself as an enemy. Once he learns about the Mechana and starts to widen his perspective, he wants to try reasoning and compromising with Egil before even considering to kill him. The areas within the Mechonis are focused around vertical movement, just like the Bionis. Going up each floor on the Mechonis field, there are points where you're able to peek outside and see the Bionis off in the distance. There are still plenty of secrets to find and unique monsters to beat, so exploration is just as fun and rewarding as ever. These are places that vastly differ from anything the player would see up to this point, given the Mechonis' mechanical nature. The music has a more industrial, synthetic vibe for the areas here to complement this. As the party gets closer to the capital, the suspense of what could be awaiting them grows. Is there an army ready to annihilate them on sight? A city filled with pure evil people? No, it's neither of these things. What awaits them is Agniratha. From the moment you step into the capital, you can notice just how lifeless it is. Housing units are abundant, but there's no one living in them. The public service terminals are still active and dutifully reporting issues within the city, but there's no one around to resolve them. Mechon are the only things that live here now. And the part that hit me the most when I first got here is that I knew it wasn't always like this, just by how it felt when experiencing these things, before the story even explains how the city ended up this way. The music that you hear while exploring Agniratha is beautifully haunting. The melody feels like something you would hear within a town's theme, but it's presented in such a somber, melancholic way that you can tell something about this place is off. I love how Agniratha is one of only 2 areas on the Mechonis with a day and night version of their theme, almost as if telling the player that time and the world move forward, even if no one is there to see it. More than that though, I love how all of the detail put into building this atmosphere ties in with the story. Soon after arriving in the capital, the party begins to learn the truth of the conflict between the Bionis and Mechonis. They learn that the people who lived on the 2 Titans used to coexist peacefully. It's then revealed that it was Zanza, the creator of the Monado, who controlled the Bionis and started the battle with the Mechonis. With his initial attack, he targeted the Mechana capital, wiping out most of the people living there when he did. Shulk realizes that the weapon he's been using and the one who helped him unlock its power were responsible for the deaths of countless people, and it leaves him feeling sick and conflicted. If his journey had played out differently and he didn't get to see the truth of the world with his own eyes, he would have very likely become a perpetrator in the same cycle of violence and hatred that led to the attack on Colony 9 at the beginning of the story. Now, Shulk is determined to put an end to that cycle, and resolves to come to an understanding with Egil without resorting to killing him. We'll end up the synopsis here, but the emotions from the depressing revelation resonate perfectly with the way it feels when you're making your way through the capital. Even in spite of how small the area is and how little time you spend here, it's one of my favorites because of all these things it does so well. They make it feel more than just a real place. It's a fascinating, beautiful, tragic place. There are so many small details that go into creating the world of any video game, let alone an open world one, so even talking as much as I have, I feel like I'm barely cracking the surface on what makes one good. These are just the parts that I enjoy the most in Xenoblade, and I hope that in watching this video you might find new appreciation for things you may have glanced over initially, like I did. Traveling across the 2 Titans for the first time was an unforgettable experience for me. It helped bridge a gap I had with the open world genre and start to understand how immersive they could be. I know I sounded pretty negative about the other games I brought up in the video, but I've gone back to them since playing Xenoblade and have actually had a ton of fun with them. I still have a bad habit of getting distracted and lost way too easily, but you know, it's still a work in progress. It's hard to say what the most important part of Xenoblade's open world is. To some, it's the massive and beautiful areas you'll get to see. To others, it may be how fun it is to make new discoveries while exploring, or how exciting it can be to narrowly beat a tough enemy you happen to stumble across. To me, though, it's how the world feels completely unique and distinct from anything else I've seen before. The most interesting part of the game for me isn't the story, the characters, the gameplay, or even the music, but the world itself. And I don't think there's any greater success an open world game can have than that. Hello there, thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. You remember when I said I was going to make the next couple videos shorter? Yeah, that was my bad. In the bright side, I did have a lot of fun putting this together. I experimented with some audio stuff and some editing. Let me know what you thought down below in the comments. It was good, bad, better, worse, things like that. Major thank you to Anel for letting me use his clip of Ryan fighting Final Marcus. Even with all the time that I put into the game, I'm still nowhere near the level that he was at to be able to do that. So it made making that one little point really, really simple and easy. So thank you so much. He's got a lot of great content on his channel. I'll be sure to link it down below. And as always, any sort of likes, subscriptions, anything like that do go a long way to helping out the channel grow. I'm really, really grateful for all the growth that we've seen already. And thank you again so much. We'll see you in the next one.